Well, I'll come out of the closet. I have known our next guest for, we were doing the math, not quite 30 years, but getting close to it. Welcome, my friend, composer and pianist, David Conte.
Hello, David.
Now, you moved here in 1985. We were doing the math, and
That's
I moved
right.
here in 1987. And you came here from Cornell, New York, to do what?
Well, so I was doing my graduate work at Cornell University in Ithaca, which is, as we were sharing, a beautiful place. And I got a job teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory, which was a very different kind of place from what it is now. We were out in the avenues in a building that used to be an orphanage. And so I came out here really to take that job. And so I'm now 28 years teaching there.
All right. And when did you first discover a love of the piano? Because I've heard you play, and obviously your compositions are well known. Beautiful pianist, but when did you first realize I have a gift for this?
Well, you know, I was, as so often happens, I came from a musical family. My parents weren't professional musicians, but my dad played trumpet in the Air Force Academy Band. I was born in Denver. We were there just very briefly. My mother was a singer. She sang with Robert Shaw, who's a very famous choral conductor in the Cleveland Orchestra chorus where I grew up in Cleveland. And so music was around the house. My parents had great classical LP collection and jazz. My dad loved jazz and the great American popular singers. And I started playing the piano when I was about 6.
And was it something that came to you naturally? I mean, did you play by ear? Do you play by ear?
I did. You know, we got a piano when we moved to our new house when I was about 6, and I just sat down and started to play, you know, mess around on it. And then I started lessons maybe within that year or so after that. So it was, I was drawn to, there was something about the sound of music that drew my attention and, you know, captivated me.
And at what point did you realize that you were also a composer?
I was crazy about the Beatles. So I'm old enough to have seen their premiere, you know,
on the Ed Sullivan
performance
show.
on the Ed Sullivan show in '64.
Something like that, yeah.
And I started writing. I had already been playing the piano. I started writing kind of like Beatles type songs. There was a girl, a neighbor girl, who wrote the words, and I wrote the music. And we actually put on a concert. I was maybe 8 years old. But I started kind of inventing music really right away.
Now, you first came here in 1985. Obviously, the Conservatory of Music has changed a lot, but also the gay community has changed a lot.
Great deal, yes.
In 1985, you were here at kind of not the very beginning, but the beginning of those worst years of AIDS and HIV. And I know you did a lot of work with the Gay Men's Chorus. What was it like working with that organization during those, I mean, really dark days with an organization that was literally decimated?
Under siege. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so I moved here in '85, and you could say that the AIDS crisis was at a kind of peak. We still didn't know everything or understand everything, and the Gay Men's Chorus, at Cornell, I'd worked with the Men's Glee Club there, so that was my introduction to male chorus singing, and I loved it. And so as soon as I moved here, I wanted to learn about the Gay Men's Chorus, and I met the conductor, who was then a man named Greg Tallman, and he commissioned me to write a work. And I decided, as I got to know the chorus, I traveled with them to Minneapolis to the Gala Conference, this big choral convention that happens every 4 years. And I was learning about how many, you know, dear friends of members were dying. I decided I wanted to write something that addressed the situation, but I wanted, even immediately then, I wanted to write a piece that wouldn't become ghettoized. In other words, it wouldn't
be gay music.
Yeah.
Or an AIDS dirge.
Exactly. And so I turned to Walt Whitman, you know, and I set actually a text that has been set by many composers, part of When Lilacs Lasted the Dooryard Bloomed, which has an invocation to death and then a kind of a passage that celebrates life. And I put these two together in 2 panels, Invocation and Dance, which was a piece they commissioned that I'm, you know, proud to say is kind of firmly in the repertory. Composers hope that they write a piece that kind of, it starts getting performed and then it kind of never, it's always being performed, and this piece is like that, and it was brought into being by the Gay Men's Chorus, and the feeling that's in the piece very much came from the situation of the feeling under siege, the sense of community that was being drawn out, how members were caring for each other, how they were facing the crisis, you know, with bravery and grace even. And so that was my initiation both into the San Francisco musical community and the gay community. It all kind of happened together in '85, '86.
Right. And since then, we've seen the epidemic change. How has, and not to stretch an analogy, but you know, that your first major piece in San Francisco was very much of a time, and as you say now is in several repertories, and it's heard. It has a life outside of
Yes,
you doing it. How has your music changed from that first piece to now?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say you're right to say that was really kind of my first important piece, like a piece where I received kind of recognition. Because I work very much, I like to work as a composer with words, whether it be for chorus or opera or songs. I've just finished an opera called Stonewall for the University of Northern Colorado. So the thing is, when a composer works with words, you're connecting with the thoughts of others, with situations, with either I wrote an opera about Andy Warhol, so you're telling a story about a person who's lived.
Do you find that limiting in a way or freeing?
To me, it's freeing in that the fun thing about writing opera is you have to become all the people you're representing. And so even though you're a man, you have to become a woman. If you're depicting a murderer, you're not a murderer, but you have to contact the part of yourself that can understand what would lead someone to do that. And so it's an enlarging experience you kind of have an experience of enlarging as a human being by telling the stories of others.
Right.
And it's great. It's really satisfying to me. I love doing it actually more than anything else.
Yeah.
Among the many other things I do with music.
So a lot of the work you've done, whether it's about 9/11 or pieces about the AIDS and HIV crisis, these are very potent political subjects. Have you ever thought of yourself as a political composer?
That's a great question. I've certainly felt honored to connect my creative thought to these events you mentioned, like 9/11, Elegy for Matthew, which I wrote in memory of Matthew Shepard, wrote a piece in memory of Martin Luther King for Chanticleer. W.H. Auden, the great poet, who is one of my favorite figures in 20th century history, said that not a single poem he wrote prevented anyone from being killed. In other words, he had the view that art was very important, but it didn't necessarily have the power to affect political change. And I don't know. That's an open question for me. I don't think I write what I write. I try and put my heart on the page with every piece I write, and if I feel inspired by these, situations, these events. As I was mentioning, just finishing the opera Stonewall, that was a chance to delve into that history and that period in history. And to tell that story. And it's a very unusual work. It has, for example, large part of it takes place in the spirit world with Michael Jackson and Judy Garland.
That's a combo that I don't think's been put in a piece together before.
Well, most people don't know that Judy Garland and Michael Jackson died almost 40 years apart to the day.
Michael Jackson also died on
it's almost to the day, but they both died, one might say, in the hands of doctors who were drugging them silly. And of course, Judy Garland is a muse for the gay community.
Because she died, and supposedly a lot of the people were grieving her and ended up at the Stonewall Bar, hence the riots and her iconic status.
So this writer has made a connection, kind of a spiritual connection between Judy Garland and Michael Jackson. So I don't know if that's political. I like to think of myself more as a spiritual, let's put it that way. Yeah. And of course, everything in life, it seems to me, from my perspective, has a spiritual dimension, including politics. So.
Right. In our last few minutes, talk a little bit about that. Your work has been described as spiritual. How does that exhibit itself in your work? What is a David Conte piece?
What a great question, David. I guess I feel it's a privilege to have been given a gift, you could say, to be able to channel what I would call divine impulses of artistic inspiration. So when I'm composing, I think of myself, it's like taking a dictation. I've trained myself very carefully to be able to do what I do. I worked very hard and studied and did all that. But I consider myself a vessel to transmit these thoughts. And of course, in working with texts and telling stories about characters and people, you're connecting to what their spiritual legacy is. And so I see myself as a servant, I would say.
Yeah.
A servant of the words and thoughts of great men like Walt Whitman, great women like Christina Rossetti, telling stories about great people like Martin Luther King and
Yeah, so you can be a composer, a pianist, and a channel for music.
Yeah.
We've been speaking with David Conte, composer, pianist, spiritual channel. Next up, we'll learn about the design and spiritually but sexual yoga of Kedon Irwin. We'll be right back.